It is impossible to mention nations that are both economic giants and world powers without making mention of China. Since its economic reforms began in the late 1970s, China has had one of the fastest-growing economies in the world. Going back to 1949, when China was founded, the nation has experienced a roller coaster of an economic development process. From revolution, socialism, Maoism, to the gradual economic reform and fast economic growth that has characterized the present-day Chinese economy. The period of the Great Leap Forward famine and the chaos of the Cultural Revolution negatively impacted the economy. However, since the period of economic reform, which began in 1978, China has seen major improvements in average living standards and has experienced relative social stability, evolving from an isolated socialist state into a backbone of the world economy. The high growth rates of the reform period were caused by the massive mobilization of resources and the shift of control of those resources from public to private ownership, which allowed for improved efficiency in the management of those resources. The benefits reaped from this period was enormous. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. Since then, the country eased into export-led growth and became a key link in global supply chains. Its industrious and cheap labor also proved attractive to foreign investors, helping it amass large trade surpluses and foreign currency reserves, which greatly increased its resources. By 2002, the profits of industrial state-owned enterprises had grown by 163.6%. Between 1990 and 2004, China's economy grew at an average rate of 10% per year, accounting for the highest growth rate in the world. More specifically, China's GDP grew by 10.0% in 2003, 10.1% in 2004, and even went a notch higher to 10.4% in 2005. In 2006, China's total trade surpassed $1.76 trillion, making it the world's third-largest trading nation, only after the US and Germany. This growth was fundamental in creating millions of job opportunities, which further improved the standard of living. Notably, China was the only nation that experienced GDP growth in 2020, when its GDP increased by 2.3% in the event of a global lockdown. The following year, China's GDP rose by 8.1%, and its trade surplus, a whopping $687.5 billion. In the past decade until now, the Chinese government has made innovation a top priority in its economic planning through a number of high-profile initiatives, such as Made in China 2025, a plan announced in 2015 to upgrade and modernize China's manufacturing in 10 key sectors through extensive government assistance in order to make China a major global player in these sectors. However, such measures have increasingly raised concerns that China intends to use industrial policies to decrease the country's reliance on foreign technology, locking out foreign firms until the country eventually dominates global markets. In 2017, the United States went on to investigate China's innovation and intellectual property policies, saying that they were harmful to its economic interests. Subsequently, the U.S. raised tariffs by 25% on $250 billion worth of imports from China, making China retaliate by increasing tariffs on $110 billion worth of imports from the United States. This move has sharply decreased bilateral trade between the two nations. Terrible as that was, the U.S. went on threatening to raise tariffs on nearly all remaining products from China, stirring a potential trade conflict between the two nations that would be disastrous for both economies. China's growing global economic influence and the economic and trade policies it maintains have significant implications for the United States and the world at large. Hence, it has become of major interest to Congress. While China is a large and growing market for U.S. firms, its incomplete transition to a free market economy has resulted in economic policies deemed harmful to U.S. economic interests, such as industrial policies and theft of U.S. intellectual property, posing costly implications to the U.S. economy. The future implications of China's fast-rising economy is the displacement of the United States as the world's largest economy. This could potentially lead to a devastating war between the two superpowers. For decades, the United States and Russia looked to be on the brink of direct war, but thankfully, war never broke out. In recent times, the rise of China has led many to fear conflict with the US is inevitable, especially with both countries competing economically, militarily, technologically, and for influence. So, is a US-China war possible? China has risen rapidly to become a superpower and is now close to being on an even footing with the US. Since the 90s, China's GDP has risen by an average of 10% every year. While this economic rise seemed to slow down slightly in recent years, partly due to the COVID-19 pandemic, China remains on top of the game, on its way to becoming the largest economy in the world in the next decade. It has been noticed that since China's fast-forwarding development, the country has made it a mandate to use the growth to transform its military. It's widely thought that China is the world's second biggest spender on its military, behind the United States. But a lack of transparency over Beijing's finances makes that difficult to prove. The country is thought to be increasing its nuclear weapons stockpile, rolling out highly dangerous hypersonic missiles, and is already a world leader in cyber warfare. Historically, China has been a land power, but over the past decades it has created a modern navy from scratch. It now has more warships than any other nation for the purpose of protecting its interests and taking authority beyond its waters. Xi Jinping, the current president of China, has made no secret of his military ambitions. According to him, China will have a world-class military, one that can still fight and win wars even decades from now. No doubt Jinping is the most powerful leader China has had in years, and it might remain so. In 2018, the country removed the two-term presidential limit, effectively meaning that Jinping could be in charge for life. With his charge in overseeing all the big decisions in China, China has shaken the world economy. From all indications, Jinping intends to use his power and the country's growing economic and military might to compete with the United States and invariably rule the world. Currently, the US has the largest military, the biggest economy, and is unarguably the most influential nation in the world. But China is fast catching up, posing as the biggest threat to the US. Even though the countries have been rivals for decades, their rivalry is currently more intense than ever because they are now on a more even footing, making the thought of a major war a possibility. You may wonder how a war could possibly break out. Well, with a vast army to weaker neighbors, China's security is guaranteed. But at sea, this is not the case. China is surrounded by an avalanche of powerful nations like Japan, South Korea, and Australia. Also, around the South China Sea, there are a host of countries, all with their own claims and their own interests to defend. Now, this part of the sea is important to China. In fact, it is a net importer of energy and food. So, control over the waterway is a matter of survival. Hence, the need to keep those routes open. But the U.S. regularly sends patrol ships through the sea, partly to offer support to its Southeast Asian allies, and partly to monitor the growth of China's influence. This region has shown to be a key area in the growing competition between the superpowers, and a region where many fear conflict could escalate. Then there is Taiwan. Taiwan is probably the most likely place for any conflict to start. This little island, which lies off the southeast coast of China, split from the mainland after the Communist Revolution in 1949. Since then, it has been independent, yet it remains of great relevance to the US and China. China proposes that Taiwan is rightfully part of its country, pledging to achieve reunification. For the United States, however, Taiwan is a key democratic ally in the region. Thus, seeking supremacy over Taiwan can lead to an escalated conflict between the two world powers. A famous theory states that when a rising power threatens to overtake a ruling power, war always follows. The theorist Thucydides was a historian in ancient Greece who wrote about the rise of Athens and the fear it instilled in Sparta. In today's parlance, we can well substitute Athens for China and Sparta for the United States. Yet the fact remains that when it comes to nuclear states, we can be certain that neither side wants war, only when it is absolutely unavoidable. Another thing we can be sure of is that the rivalry between China and the US will be the defining one of our time. Whether it remains a Cold War or turns hot, the world economy will be at stake.